Hello everybody, my name is Kendra. I dye self-striping yarn and I sell it from my Etsy shop, which is Kendra Makes Shop. And I like to try different techniques and styles just to see what works best and just to try things out. So today I am going to be dyeing up 2 different colors and I am going to be changing the way that I usually dye things. So I thought I'd kind of narrate what's going on as we sit here to kind of show you what's happening and what worked and what did not work. Now, if you're familiar with dyeing yarn, then you'll know that to have the acid dye set, you need a few things. There needs to be citric acid involved, you need to bring it up to temperature, and you need to continue keeping it at that temperature until the dye exhausts into the yarn. Now, I would say the 2 main ways that people dye yarn is either in a pot, like on top of the stove, or in a pan, a steam pan, something like that. And you can keep it submerged in the water, you can just steam it, or you can put it in something like an oven or a microwave I've heard people using, where you have it up to temperature in that sort of medium. Now, typically my preference is to do it stovetop. I feel like you have a little bit more control in that sort of setting, but I have also done some where you put the dye on first and then you heat it up to bring it to temperature. Now, for self-striping yarn, it becomes a little more complicated because you need to do each color separately. And so while you're doing one yarn on the stovetop doesn't take too long, by the time you get multiple layers on multiple different sections of yarn, it really does take a lot of time in the dye pot. Now, I want to experiment now that I'm dyeing more yarn to see if one of these other methods will work better. So once I have this yarn separated into the large skein and I have my sections made, I am first going to try putting the yarn into these separate buckets with different colors on it so that it can get the dye first, and then I'm going to try to steam set it. Feels kind of similar to the method where you would hand paint the yarn and then wrap it in like saran wrap, and that's where some people would use the oven or the microwave, but I'm going to try to continue to use the stovetop method with it. Now, you may be able to see here that I started having questions about how I should steam set it, whether to wrap it in plastic or whether to just do it section at a time. And really, in the end of this first test, I did it each section at a time. Now, some of these colors are kind of similar, so I started with the lightest one, and once that light blue is exhausted, I moved to the darker blue and I put them in together. So it did save a little bit in that those colors had a little bit of overlap with their time in the dye pot, but it still was generally one color at a time. So while it worked that my colors were mixed ahead of time rather than adding them when I was heating up the yarn to the dye pot, it didn't really save me much in the end. My next plan was to put each color into a Ziploc bag, thinking that a Ziploc could be reused. That's one of the big drawbacks of using like saran wrap, is that it feels kind of wasteful to me using all this plastic when it's not really necessary. So I did each color in a Ziploc bag and I tried to put them in the bucket to keep them contained. And I think this idea has potential and I may try it again, but let's just say a lot of things went wrong. First of all, it was very messy. I don't know why it's so much messier than putting it in the buckets, because it was dripping between the bags. I had a hard time getting them stay close together. The yellow one especially kept spilling through. Yeah, I had some issues there. So then next I put it in my dye pot and I put all the colors in the bags in the dye pot, which I thought was a great idea as far as steam setting it. And I don't know if I just didn't have it in there long enough, but I found that once I was done and I went to rinse my yarns, they were bleeding out and they were not fully set. So I had to bring them all back into the dye pot and reheat set them. I think that this method has potential, but I definitely came into some issues. Now, also with that, since I put all the colors back together in my dye pot, it got to be a bit of a tangled mess. It was kind of frustrating, but I just went slow and steady and was able to get through it all. And now I have these 2 new colorways. These colors are actually now in my Etsy shop, and I wanted to let you know that even though it was an experiment, I did make sure that everything was done properly, just the method had changed a little bit. And so if you want to check them out, they are for sale over there. But yeah, that was kind of my experiment. Let me know if you have used either of these types of methods. I haven't seen others doing this. I have seen the mason jar method, where you put each color into a mason jar filled with dye and then set it in the oven. I have done that before and it worked, but unless people have like larger mason jars, as you start increasing the amount you're dyeing at one time, it just wasn't fitting in there properly. That's why I wanted to try with the bags, but maybe having like gallon glass jars would be a better method for it. Let me know if you've tried that. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.